I came to my daughter's wedding, but she said, "Sorry, but you're not invited." I left silently, but it was I who paid for the entire celebration. 2 hours later, I canceled all the payments. When my daughter found out, she called me in panic. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Collins, but everyone who ever loved me called me Maggie. I was 67 years old, a widow for 9 years, and I had spent the better part of my adult life believing that a mother's love was the one investment that never depreciated. I had believed that, with the kind of quiet, unquestioning faith that some people reserve for church on Sundays. I believed it even when the evidence began, slowly, then all at once, to suggest otherwise. I lived alone in the house where I had raised Ashley, my only daughter. It was a pale yellow colonial on Birchwood Lane in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of house that whispered of lemonade on the porch and homework at the kitchen table. My husband, Robert, had died of a heart attack in the spring of 2016, leaving me with a modest inheritance, a paid-off mortgage, and a grief so heavy I thought it would flatten me entirely. It was Ashley who had held my hand at the funeral. Ashley who had stayed the first week, sleeping in her old room, making me toast I didn't eat. In those dark, early days, she was everything. So when she called me 2 years later to tell me she had met someone, a man named Brandon Holt, a contractor from Columbus, I was genuinely happy for her. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the morning light coming through the yellow curtains Robert had helped me hang, and thinking, this is good. She deserves good things. I had never been the kind of mother who interrogates. I asked if he made her laugh. She said yes. That was enough for me. Brandon seemed acceptable the first time I met him. Quiet, broad-shouldered, the type who shook your hand firmly and then had nothing left to say. What I noticed more was his mother, Diane Holt. Diane was 61, recently divorced, and operated with the kind of practiced elegance that made you feel vaguely underdressed even in your own home. She wore silk blouses to casual dinners and had opinions about everything, delivered with the certainty of someone who had never once considered that she might be wrong. She assessed me the way a jeweler assesses a stone of uncertain origin, briefly and with barely concealed disappointment. I told myself I was imagining it. The engagement was announced at Christmas. Ashley called me first and I cried. The good kind of crying, the kind that comes from a full heart rather than an empty one. "We want a June wedding," she told me. "Something beautiful, Mom. Something real." And then, after a pause that I would later replay 1,000 times, "Brandon's family doesn't have much money right now. His business has been slow." Another pause. "We were hoping—" "I'll handle it," I said, because that is what I had always done. Over the following 4 months, I handled all of it. I put $47,000 of Robert's life insurance money I had been holding like something sacred, into that wedding. The venue, the Willowbrook Estate outside Columbus, $18,500. The catering, $11,200 for 140 guests. The flowers, the photographer, the string quartet, the custom cake. I attended every planning meeting, drove the 40 minutes to Columbus a dozen times, sat across from vendors writing checks while Ashley scrolled her phone and Diane made adjustments to my choices with a smile that never reached her eyes. I should have noticed sooner. I see that now. The changes in Ashley were gradual, the way water damage in a house goes unnoticed until the ceiling caves. She began returning my calls an hour late, then 2 hours, then not at all until the following day. Our Wednesday lunches, a ritual we had kept for years, were canceled 3 times in a row. When I raised it, she said she was stressed. I said I understood, because I did. Because I always tried to. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was removed from the group chat where all the planning updates were shared. Ashley told me it was an accident. I believed her. 1 week before, I arrived at her apartment to drop off a gift. A pearl bracelet that had been my mother's, which I had planned to give her as her something old. Diane's car was in the driveway. I knocked. There was a long pause before the door opened, and Ashley's expression when she saw me was not joy. It was something closer to alarm. "Mom, you should have called." I held up the small velvet box. "I just wanted to give you this." She took it without opening it. Diane appeared behind her like a shadow, holding a glass of white wine, and the smile she gave me was the kind that means the opposite of what smiles are supposed to mean. I drove home telling myself it was pre-wedding nerves. And then came the day itself. I wore my navy dress. The one Robert had always said brought out my eyes. I had my hair set at the salon the morning of. I drove to the Willowbrook estate, which I had paid for, and walked through the doors of the venue I had chosen, and made my way toward the bridal suite to see my daughter before the ceremony. The door was opened by Diane. She looked at me for a moment, a long, evaluating moment, and then stepped halfway into the doorframe, blocking my view. "Maggie," she said, with that same upside-down smile. "This isn't really a good time." "I'm her mother," I said. "I just want to see her." Ashley appeared then, over Diane's shoulder. She was in her gown, my grandmother's pearls around her throat, the bracelet I had given her nowhere to be seen. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. "Mom?" she said quietly, and then, "I'm sorry, but you're not on the guest list. We didn't include you. I'm sorry. You should go." I stood there. The hallway smelled of gardenias and candle wax. Somewhere below us, a string quartet was warming up. A quartet I had paid $3,400 to be here today. My daughter looked at the floor. Diane looked at me with an expression I can only describe as satisfaction. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I turned around, walked back down the carpeted staircase, through the lobby, out the front door, and into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 4 minutes. Then I picked up my phone. I have lived long enough to know the difference between shock and clarity. Shock makes you shake. Clarity makes you still. Sitting in that parking lot, watching a valet in a white shirt jog past my car, I was very, very still. The math came first, because I had been a bookkeeper for 31 years, and numbers were always how I ordered chaos. $47,000. That was what I had spent. $47,000 from a life insurance payout I had never touched because touching it had felt like spending Robert, spending the last tangible thing that remained of 38 years of marriage. I had broken that open for my daughter's wedding, and my daughter had just told me, in a hallway that smelled of flowers I had paid for, that I was not welcome at it. The catering, the venue, the quartet playing downstairs right now, the photographer who would spend the next 6 hours documenting a day I was not permitted to witness. I opened my banking app. The venue deposit had been paid in full by wire transfer in February, $18,500. The catering company, Harvest and Vine, had been paid in 2 installments, the final one just 3 weeks ago, $11,200 total. The florist, $4,800. The photographer, $3,900. The string quartet, $3,400. The cake, $2,200. Miscellaneous, linens, lighting, the custom monogrammed napkins that Diane had specifically requested, which I had quietly agreed to. Another $3,000, give or take. I sat and looked at these numbers until they stopped feeling like money and started feeling like a story. A story about a woman who had said, "I'll handle it," and meant it. A woman who had assumed that love was a currency that circulated, that what you gave came back to you in some form, if not identical, then at least recognizable. What had come back to me was a door held half shut by a woman in a silk blouse. How did I get here? I thought. And then I thought, does it matter how? What matters is what happens next. I had never been impulsive. Robert used to tease me about it. Maggie plans her spontaneity, he would say, which was not entirely wrong. I did not act without thinking, but I also, and this was something Robert had understood and loved about me, did not absorb a wrong quietly when I had the means to address it. I had the means. The venue contract was between the Willowbrook estate and me, Margaret Ann Collins. I had signed it. My credit card was on file as the guarantor. The catering contract, same. The florist, the photographer, the quartet, the cake, every single vendor had contracted with me, personally, because Ashley had asked me to handle the logistics, and I had done exactly that. My name was on every piece of paper. I pulled up my contacts and found the number for my attorney, a woman named Patricia Lund, who had handled Robert's estate and whom I trusted completely. It was a Saturday. I didn't care. I sent her a text. "Patricia, I need to talk to you Monday morning. It's urgent. I've been financially exploited and I need to understand my options." Then I opened my email and began composing a message to myself. A list of every vendor, every amount, every contract. I had digital copies of all of them in a folder I had created in February called Ashley's Wedding. Contracts. I had been organized. I had been thorough. That thoroughness was about to serve a purpose its creator had never imagined. My plan, in those first raw minutes in the parking lot, was not vindictive. It was precise. I was not a woman who acted from rage. Rage burns indiscriminately. I was a woman who had spent 31 years reconciling figures, and what I intended to do was reconcile this. The question was whether I had the legal standing to cancel payments already made. Some I did, almost certainly. The photographer had a 48-hour cancellation window in his contract, and I was within it. The caterer's final payment had gone through my American Express card, and American Express had a dispute process I had never used, but understood. The venue was more complicated. I would need Patricia for that. But there was one payment I could stop immediately, without any contract or attorney or dispute process. Because I had written Ashley a personal check 2 weeks ago. $5,000 intended as a honeymoon contribution, left in an envelope on her kitchen counter when I had stopped by unannounced, and she had been in the shower. She had texted me the next day, "Mom, you didn't have to. Thank you." I had saved that text. That check had not yet cleared. I could see it in my bank app, still pending. I called my bank's customer service line. I sat in that parking lot in my navy dress with the gardenias still faintly in my memory, and I put the check on stop. It took 4 minutes. Then I sat back and breathed for the first time since I had walked through those doors. Somewhere inside the Willowbrook estate, a wedding was beginning. Crystal glasses were being filled. A father, Brandon's father, who had apparently made the guest list without difficulty, was walking my daughter down an aisle I had paid to decorate. I started the car. I drove home. I had work to do. The 40 minutes back to Dayton felt longer than they were. I thought about Ashley at 7 years old, losing her first tooth at the kitchen table and crying because it hurt more than she expected. I thought about Ashley at 16, calling me from a party, frightened, asking me to come get her. No questions asked. I thought about the version of my daughter who had stayed with me the week after Robert died. I tried to hold those memories gently without letting them soften my resolve, because I knew, I had always known, that love and accountability are not opposites. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Birchwood Lane, the plan had taken a clearer shape. I did not sleep well Saturday night or Sunday. I sat at Robert's old desk in the study, the one I had never been able to replace, still faintly smelling of the pipe tobacco he had given up in 2008, but whose ghost lingered in the wood. And I went through every contract, every receipt, every email. I organized them into a binder. I made notes in the margins in pencil. By Sunday evening, I had a document that was thorough enough to present to anyone. Monday morning, I was in Patricia Lund's office on 5th Street by 9:15. Patricia was 63, sharp-featured, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades listening to other people's disasters without becoming desensitized to them. She read through my binder without comment for 12 minutes. Then she took off her reading glasses and looked at me. "You have more leverage than most people in your position," she said, "because you are the contracting party on everything. Ashley is not named in any of these vendor agreements as the client of record. You are." "I know," I said. "The venue is the hardest. You signed a contract with a cancellation policy. You'd lose the deposit, which was 10%. $1,850, I said. "I can absorb that." "The caterer's final payment went through American Express?" "Yes. File a dispute." "The event occurred, so a standard fraud claim won't hold. But if you argue the service was rendered for an event from which you were wrongfully excluded as the contracting client, it's a gray area, but Amex tends to side with cardholders on disputes involving disputed service receipt. It's worth filing." We spent 90 minutes working through each line item. By the time I left her office, I had a strategy. She would send letters to the florist and the photographer, who I had already emailed separately, formally notifying them that the contracting party was disputing the final services. She would also draft a letter to the Willowbrook estate, documenting that I, as the signing client, had been refused entry to the event I had funded. "It probably won't get your full deposit back," she said, "but it creates a paper trail, and that has value." That paper trail would matter more than I knew. It was later that same Monday, I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Harvest and Vine Catering. The subject line, "Your inquiry. Contract holder verification." I had emailed them Friday evening, right after leaving Patricia's office the first time, asking them to confirm in writing who the contract holder of record was. Their response confirmed: Margaret Ann Collins, 4417, Birchwood Lane, Dayton, Ohio. I printed it and put it in the binder, but that was not the evidence that changed everything. That came at 6:47 that evening from a number I didn't immediately recognize. It was a text, a long one, and it began, "Mrs. Collins, my name is Claire Abernethy. I was Ashley's maid of honor until 3 weeks ago, when she removed me from the wedding party. I know what happened to you at the venue on Saturday. I was there. I also know why it happened, and I think you deserve to know too." I sat down. Claire, as I would learn over the course of several messages, and then a phone call that lasted an hour and 20 minutes, had been Ashley's closest friend since college. She had been removed from the wedding party after objecting directly to Ashley, to something Diane Holt had orchestrated. Diane had been the one to suggest that I not be invited. This had apparently begun 6 weeks before the wedding, during a dinner at Diane's house in Upper Arlington that Ashley had attended without me. Diane had raised concerns. Carefully worded concerns, Claire said, the kind that don't leave fingerprints, about my controlling behavior, my need to insert myself, my emotional instability following the loss of my husband. She had suggested that my presence at the wedding would be stressful for Ashley, and that it might be better for everyone if I attended only the reception, if at all. Did Ashley object? I asked. A pause. Not enough, Claire said quietly. But the detail that stopped my breath was this. Claire still had a screenshot. A screenshot of a message Diane had sent to the wedding party group chat. After I had been removed from it, which read, in part, "I know Margaret paid for everything, but that's exactly the power dynamic we're trying to break. Ashley needs to start her marriage on her own terms, not under obligation to her mother. We're doing the right thing." I asked Claire to send it to me. She did. I sat at Robert's desk and read it 3 times. That's exactly the power dynamic we're trying to break. Diane had known. She had known I paid for everything, and she had used that knowledge, not to encourage gratitude, but to construct a justification for exclusion. She had framed my generosity as dominance so that cutting me out would look, to my daughter, like liberation. And Ashley, my Ashley, who had called me from that party at 16, frightened and trusting, had believed her. I forwarded the screenshot to Patricia. Then I sat quietly for a long time in the house on Birchwood Lane. The evening light came through the yellow curtains. I thought about what I was going to do. I was no longer asking whether I had the right. I was past that entirely. I had never in my life described myself as someone who enjoyed conflict. I had resolved disputes quietly, professionally, across 3 decades of accounting work and 1 long marriage. But there is a particular quality of calmness that comes when you have been wronged completely, when the wrong has been documented, when your attorney has reviewed your position and confirmed it is sound. That quality is not aggression. It is precision. On Tuesday morning, Patricia sent formal letters to the photographer and florist, notifying them that the contracting client was invoking dispute rights under the contract terms. The photographer, a young man named Derek, who had been pleasant throughout, responded within 2 hours saying he was willing to discuss a partial refund of the remaining balance, given the unusual circumstances. The florist did not respond. I filed the American Express dispute for the catering final payment myself, online, selecting service not received as contracted and attaching a brief explanation, the email from Harvest and Vine confirming me as the contract holder, and a 2-sentence factual account. I was denied entry to the event I funded as the contracting client. I did not receive the service I paid for. Patricia sent a formal letter to the Willowbrook estate. By Wednesday afternoon, Ashley knew. She called 7 times between 2 and 4:30. I let the first 4 go to voicemail. The messages escalated in a way that told me a great deal about what had been said to her and by whom. The first was tearful and confused. "Mom, what's going on? The caterer's people called Brandon. What did you do?" By the 4th, the tone had shifted. "You're ruining my marriage before it even starts. You can't do this. These were gifts. You can't take back gifts." She was wrong about that, legally, in several respects. I let Patricia's next letter clarify it. Brandon called once. He did not leave a voicemail. Diane called twice from a number I had stored in my phone. I had added it the previous autumn, when we had coordinated a vendor meeting. The first call I declined. On the second, I answered. Maggie. Her voice was controlled, smooth. The voice of a woman who believed that composure was a weapon. "I think we need to talk about what's happening here, because I'm afraid you're going to do something you regret." "I've already done everything I intend to do," I said. "My attorney is handling the rest." A brief silence. "Your attorney?" She let the words sit there as if they were faintly absurd. "Maggie, this is a family matter. Bringing lawyers into a family matter." "Diane," I said, "you're not my family." Another silence, longer this time. "What you're doing," she said then, and the composure had thinned slightly at the edges, "is vengeful. It's petty. And it will destroy your relationship with Ashley permanently. Is that what you want?" I had thought about what I would say if she raised Ashley. I had prepared for it the way I had once prepared for difficult client meetings. Not scripting myself, but knowing my ground. What I want, I said, is not something you have the authority to give or take. What I have is documentation. What I have is contracts with my name on them. And what I have is a screenshot of a message you sent to a group chat after you had me removed from it, explaining your strategy. I want you to know that my attorney has a copy. The silence that followed was of a different quality entirely. I don't know what you think you have, she began. I know exactly what I have, I said. Goodbye, Diane. I ended the call. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that with some surprise. I put the phone on the desk and looked at it for a moment, and then I went to the kitchen and made myself a proper dinner for the first time in days. Salmon, roasted potatoes, the asparagus I had bought and not gotten around to. I ate at the kitchen table with the evening news on low in the background, and I felt, for the first time since Saturday, something approaching equilibrium. Over the following 2 days, the calls stopped. Ashley sent 2 text messages, the second more subdued than the first, something about wanting to talk when things calmed down. I read it and did not respond. I called my friend Ruth, who had known me since before I was married, and told her I needed a few days away. Ruth lived in a small house in Yellow Springs, 40 minutes east, with a garden that smelled of lavender in summer and a porch where you could sit without speaking for an hour and feel it was not wasted time. She said, "Come Thursday. Stay as long as you need." I went Thursday. I stayed 4 days. I walked. I slept. I helped Ruth weed her vegetable beds. I did not look at my phone more than twice a day. When I drove back to Birchwood Lane on Sunday evening, I was rested in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I was ready for whatever came next. The first message came on Monday morning, the day after I returned from Ruth's. It arrived as a text from Ashley at 8:43 a.m., while I was drinking my first cup of coffee at the kitchen table. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I don't want to fight. Can we please talk? Just us." I read it twice. I set the phone down. I poured a second cup of coffee and stood at the window looking at the backyard, Robert's old bird feeder, which I kept filled out of habit. And I considered the message with the same deliberate attention I had once given to contracts. Just us. That phrase was doing work. It was an acknowledgement, implicit but present, that us had been complicated by other people. It was the nearest thing to an admission I had received. I was not unmoved by it. I was her mother, and I was not constructed to be unmoved by her. But I had also spent 4 days in Ruth's garden reminding myself that love and self-respect are not a zero-sum equation. I replied at noon. Not immediately. The timing was intentional. Not from strategy, but from a desire to respond from a still place rather than a reactive one. "I'm willing to talk, Ashley, but I want you to understand that I'm not going to be persuaded to withdraw what's in motion. That's not what a conversation will be for. If you want to talk, we can talk." She called that afternoon. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. She cried. I did not cry, though I wanted to. Not from grief exactly, but from a particular exhaustion that comes from loving someone who has allowed themselves to be used against you. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known things would go that far. She said Diane had told her I would understand, that mothers always forgive, that my exclusion had been framed as a kindness. She needs to let go, Ashley, and you need to give her the chance to do that gracefully. Did you believe that? I asked. A long pause. I wanted to, she said, which was the most honest thing she had said to me in months. I told her I heard her. I told her I was not prepared to stop the dispute processes. I told her that what she did with that information was her own decision to make, and that her marriage was her own life. and that I had no interest in controlling either one. "But I'm not going to be treated as I was treated," I said, and then asked to quietly absorb the cost of it in every sense of that phrase. She did not argue. That surprised me. She asked if I would meet her for coffee. Not Brandon, not Diane, just her. I said I would think about it. I also did something that week that I had been considering since the night Claire had called me. I reached out to Claire directly, by phone, and asked if she would be willing to put her account in writing, not for any legal purpose, but simply as a factual record. She agreed without hesitation. "I've felt sick about this since it happened," she said. "I should have told someone sooner." I told her she had told someone in time. Claire was not the only ally who surfaced. My neighbor Helen, a retired teacher who had lived 3 houses down since 1994 and who had known Ashley since she was small, stopped me in the driveway on Thursday to ask how I was. Helen was not a gossip. She was a woman who paid attention. I told her, in moderate terms, what had occurred. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Ashley's grandmother would be heartsick." She was right. My mother, who had died the year before Robert, had adored Ashley with the uncomplicated devotion of grandmothers, and would indeed have found the events of the previous 2 weeks incomprehensible. I also, unexpectedly, heard from Derek, the photographer. He had seen the dispute letter and wanted to resolve things professionally. During our conversation, he mentioned, without my prompting, that he had overheard something at the venue. He had been setting up near the bridal suite that morning. He had heard raised voices, Ashley's and another woman's. He had heard the words, "Just tell her she's not on the list." He had not known at the time what to make of it. "Would you be willing to put that in a written statement?" I asked. "Informally, nothing legal." "Sure," he said, and seemed faintly relieved to be asked. "Yeah, absolutely." By the end of that week, I had 4 people, Patricia, Claire, Ruth, and Helen, who knew the full account of what had happened and stood behind my version of events without qualification. Derek's written account was not nothing either. I did not require an army. I required a foundation. I had one. On Friday evening, I sat on the front porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the street and felt the particular peace of a woman who has decided who she is and what she will and will not accept. The summer evening was warm and long and quiet. A family walked past with a dog, a kid on a bicycle. Ordinary things, beautiful in their ordinariness. I thought about the coffee meeting with Ashley. I thought I might agree to it. Not yet. But soon. They came on a Saturday morning, 11 days after the wedding, without calling first. I was in the backyard deadheading the roses along the fence, a task that required just enough attention to be meditative, when I heard the knock at the front door. I came through the house to find Diane and Brandon standing on my porch. Not Ashley. I noted her absence immediately and stored it. Brandon wore a collared shirt, which seemed effortful. Diane wore pale linen, her hair smooth, her expression calibrated to something between concern and generosity. The expression of a woman who has practiced her entrance. "Maggie," she said, "we were hoping you had a few minutes." I looked at them both for a long moment. Then I opened the door. I did not offer coffee. I led them to the living room and sat in the armchair that had been Robert's, not from sentimentality in that moment, but because it faced the sofa directly, and I wanted to face them directly. They sat. I did not. "We came," Diane said, "because we think this has gone far enough." She said it gently, the way you say things you intend to sound like wisdom. "We understand you were hurt. What happened at the venue, that could have been handled better. We can acknowledge that." "Could have been," I said. "But what you're doing, the disputes, the attorney, the letters, It's causing real damage, Maggie. Not just to Brandon and Ashley's finances, to their marriage, to Ashley's mental health. She's not sleeping. She paused for effect. Is that what you want for your daughter? I had heard variations of this argument before. The argument that my response to harm was itself the harm. I recognized it the way you recognize a particular piece of music, not note by note, but as a whole. What I want for Ashley, I said, is for her to be in a marriage where the people around her don't manipulate her against her own mother. A slight shift in Diane's posture, almost imperceptible. Brandon leaned forward then. He was more direct than his mother, less skilled at wrapping things. Look, he said, we're talking about real money. The Amex dispute alone could hit the caterer hard. These are small business people. You want to hurt them because of a family disagreement? The dispute is against the charge, not the caterer, I said. The caterer will be reimbursed by the card company during the investigation. That's how the process works. But I appreciate that you've familiarized yourself with it. His jaw tightened. Maggie. Diane tried again, softer. Think about the future. Think about grandchildren. Think about Christmas mornings. If you continue down this path, you will not be part of any of that. Ashley loves you. She made a mistake. But if you keep pushing this, people draw lines. There it was, the threat dressed as concern. People draw lines, meaning stop or be permanently excluded. Stop or we will formalize the exclusion that we have already begun. I thought about Claire's screenshot on my phone. We're doing the right thing. I thought about Derek's written statement in my folder upstairs. I thought about Patricia's voice, even and certain. You have more leverage than most people in your position. Diane, I said. And I was very calm now, the kind of calm that comes from the bottom of things rather than the surface. I have a message from you, in writing, explaining that you deliberately orchestrated my exclusion from an event I fully funded. I have a witness account from a vendor who was present at the venue. I have a statement from Claire Abernethy detailing the conversations you had in the 6 weeks before the wedding. My attorney has all of it. The composure on Diane's face did something I had not seen it do before. It flickered. Whatever Claire told you, she started. I also want you to know, I continued as if she hadn't spoken, that I have no interest in legal action against you personally. None. What I have is a set of contractual disputes that are entirely between me and the vendors I contracted with. Those will proceed according to the standard processes. Neither you nor Brandon is a party to any of them. So there is, in fact, nothing for you to negotiate here. Brandon stood up. You're making a mistake. You came to my house without calling, I said. I think it's time for you to go. They went. Diane walked out first, her spine very straight, her expression rearranged into something that was not quite neutral. Brandon followed. He did not look at me when he passed. I stood at the front door and watched them back out of my driveway. I closed the door when they reached the street. Then I stood in my entryway and breathed. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. Not of them exactly, but of the thing Diane had named with the phrase, people draw lines. I was afraid that Ashley would let those lines be drawn for her, the way she had let so many things be decided for her over the past 6 months. I was afraid that the version of my daughter who had called me from a party at 16 was becoming someone I would not recognize. But the fear did something unexpected. It did not soften my resolve. It fed it. Because the alternative to pushing forward was acceptance. Acceptance of the idea that I could be used, discarded, and then called back to apologize. That was not something I was able to do. I went back to the garden and finished deadheading the roses. The coffee meeting with Ashley happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the wedding. She had texted again to ask. I had said yes. I chose the place. A quiet cafe on Brown Street called The Lantern that I had gone to since before Ashley was born. A place where I felt like myself. A place that was mine. I arrived first and took a corner table. I ordered tea. I placed my phone on the table face down and waited. Ashley came in 5 minutes late, which was not like her. She had always been punctual, something I had instilled from childhood. She looked thinner. Her eyes had the slightly hollow quality of someone who hadn't slept enough for weeks. She sat down across from me, set her bag on the chair beside her, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since her father's funeral. Raw, without armor. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry." I let the words be there for a moment without answering them, not from cruelty, because I had learned over the years that the first version of an apology is often a release of pressure rather than a reckoning. I wanted to understand which kind this was. "Tell me what you're sorry for," I said. She told me. It took a while. She described the dinner at Diane's in April, the conversation that had reframed my involvement as control. She described the group chat, the decision, the way it had felt, she said, like the decision had been made around her rather than by her. "I didn't fight it," she said. "I know. I should have. I told myself it was for me, that I needed to do this for me, but it wasn't. It was for her. And I knew that. And She stopped. I knew it, and I let it happen anyway. That was the thing I had needed to hear, not the apology, the admission that she had known. "Why?" I asked. Simply. She was quiet for a moment. "Because saying no to Diane meant a fight with Brandon, and I was scared of starting my marriage with that." She looked at her hands. "I made you pay for it instead." I did not respond to that immediately, because the truth of it was so plainly stated and so painful that there was nothing to add to it. What I did instead was take a folder from my bag and set it on the table. It contained Claire's written account, Derek's statement, a printout of Diane's message from the group chat. I had organized them with paper clips and a cover page that contained no commentary, just the documents in chronological order. "I want you to read these," I said. "Not here, not now. Take them home. Read them when you're alone." She looked at the folder without touching it. "What is this?" "It's an account of what happened," I said. "From people who were there and had nothing to gain from telling me, including something Diane wrote about you, about why she felt justified in what she did." Ashley picked up the folder. She opened it to the first page, which was Claire's account. She read the first paragraph. Something moved across her face that I couldn't entirely name. Recognition, maybe, or the particular pain of seeing, in writing, something you had refused to see clearly before. She closed the folder. "Are you going to use this? Legally?" "No," I said. "It's yours. I'm giving it to you because you deserve to have accurate information about your own life." She put the folder in her bag. She was quiet for a long time. Outside on Brown Street, a bus went past, heavy and unhurried. The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and something baking in the back. "She told Brandon I was lucky to have a mother who cared enough to contribute," Ashley said finally. "That's how she put it. Contribute. Like you were a vendor." "I know," I said. "She told him that you had issues with control because of what happened with Dad, that you were transferring your grief into—" She stopped again. "These are direct quotes, Mom. She said these things to my husband." "I know that too." What happened next, I did not engineer. It happened because Ashley was, underneath everything, her father's daughter. Someone who, when finally confronted with a clear and documented truth, could not maintain a comfortable falsehood. She called Brandon from the table. Right then, while I was sitting across from her, she asked him to come to the Lantern, He arrived 25 minutes later, looking irritable, and then, when he saw the folder open on the table between us, looking wary. "Your mother told you I had grief-related control issues," Ashley said to him, not loudly, very evenly. "When did she tell you that? Before or after the dinner in April?" Brandon looked at me, then at his wife. "Ashley, this isn't." "When, Brandon?" "She was trying to help you." "When?" His jaw worked. "March," he said. It was March. The dinner was in April. I watched Ashley process that. Watched her understand that the campaign had begun before the dinner she thought had started it. Diane had been working longer and more deliberately than Ashley had known. Diane had not come. She did not know this meeting was happening. That was, in retrospect, her single strategic error. She had underestimated Ashley's capacity, when given facts, to think for herself. What happened in the weeks that followed? The Lantern meeting moved with the kind of quiet inevitability that I have come to associate with truth. Truth does not require speed. It requires only that it remains true, while everything built on top of the lie begins to settle and crack. The American Express dispute resolved in my favor. The case took 6 weeks, and the decision was brief and without drama. Amex sided with the cardholder. Harvest and Vine received their payment directly from the card company, which meant no small business was harmed. $11,200 was credited back to my account. I did not celebrate. I noted it, the way I had once noted correct entries in a ledger, and moved on. Derek, the photographer, reached a settlement for the balance of his fee that both parties agreed to in writing. He was gracious about it, and I retained the photographs, which, as the contracting client, I was entitled to. I have looked at them only once. Ashley is beautiful in them. I kept 3 prints. The florist resolved after Patricia's second letter. A partial refund, agreed upon without further dispute. The Willowbrook estate was the longest and most formal process. Patricia presented the documentation, my contract, the evidence of my exclusion as the signing client, Derek's statement, to the estate's management company. They did not admit wrongdoing. Venues rarely do. But they offered a partial credit toward a future event, $6,200. Patricia advised me to accept. I did. Total recovered. Approximately $23,000 of the $47,000 I had spent. Not everything, but nearly half returned from an investment that had been taken from me without consent. I did not need the money in any urgent sense. That was never what it had been about. What I had needed was the refusal to be absorbed, to have the wrong quietly metabolized by my own willingness to let it go. Some wrongs should not be let go. Some wrongs, if you let them go without address, teach everyone involved that there is no cost to repeating them. The consequences for Brandon and Ashley were their own, and not of my devising. Ashley confronted Diane directly in the week after the Lantern, with the folder of documents and a clarity that, by all accounts from Claire, was formidable. The conversation was not quiet. It took place at Diane's house in Upper Arlington, and Claire, who had been invited by Ashley specifically as a witness, told me afterward that Diane had spent the first 20 minutes denying the substance of the documents, then shifted to justification. I was protecting you. I was protecting your marriage. And then, when Ashley placed Claire's written account on the table and asked Diane to read the specific paragraph in which Claire had quoted Diane's words directly, Diane had gone very quiet and had not recovered her composure for the remainder of the conversation. Brandon, faced with evidence that his mother had begun her campaign against me in March, a month before he had believed it started, a month before Ashley had known anything was happening, had a harder reckoning than he may have expected. He had believed, I think sincerely, that Diane's concerns about me had been legitimate. Learning that those concerns had been manufactured, or at least amplified strategically and early, required him to revise a story he had already integrated into his understanding of his marriage. I don't know what was said between Brandon and Diane in private. I don't need to know. What I know is that Ashley called me on a Thursday morning in August, 2 months after the wedding, and asked if she could come to Birchwood Lane for lunch. I said yes. She came alone. She sat at the kitchen table where she had done homework as a child, in the same yellow light through the same yellow curtains. And we ate together for the first time since before all of it. She did not ask me to undo what I had done. She did not ask me to apologize. She said, "I know I don't have the right to ask you to trust me again right away. I know I have to earn that." I told her that was exactly right. She nodded. She seemed, for the first time in the months I had watched her moving toward that wedding, like herself. Diane was not part of our lunch. Diane was not invited. It was my understanding, from what Ashley said obliquely and what Claire confirmed more directly, that Diane's relationship with Brandon had shifted considerably in the months following the confrontation. That she called less. That Brandon answered differently when she called. That some weight, which I had not put there and could not have removed, had lifted from the structure of his marriage when the source of it was identified. I made no claim on any of that. It was not my doing and not my victory. What was mine was the lunch on Birchwood Lane, the yellow light, my daughter at my table. That was enough. In fact, it was everything. By September, I had developed what Ruth called, affectionately, the posture of a woman who has stopped apologizing for existing. I wasn't sure that was accurate, but I understood what she meant. Something had clarified in me over the course of that summer that had nothing to do with money or disputes or documentation. Something about the difference between hoping to be treated well and deciding to require it. I signed up for an evening bookkeeping course at the community college, not because I needed the credential, but because I had missed the work, missed the satisfaction of columns that balanced, missed the sense of being useful in a specific and skilled way. The instructor was 30 years younger than me and had the slightly harried energy of someone who teaches evening classes after a full day elsewhere. I was the oldest student in the room by 2 decades. I didn't mind. By the 3rd week, the instructor had started directing questions toward me when the younger students were stuck. I volunteered 2 mornings a week at the public library, helping to organize a financial literacy program for elderly residents. People who were navigating estate questions or tax filings alone, the way I had navigated them after Robert died. I was good at it. I was calm with frightened people. I knew what it felt like to face paperwork that seemed designed to defeat you, and I knew how to make it feel manageable. Ruth and I started driving to Yellow Springs every other Sunday, alternating whose turn it was to provide lunch. We had been friends for 40 years, and I had, in the busy decades of motherhood and work and marriage, sometimes let the friendship coast on its own history. I stopped coasting. I showed up for it deliberately, the way you tend a garden that has survived neglect and deserves better. Helen, my neighbor, joined the library program as a volunteer, and we began carpooling. Small things, ordinary things, but they had the texture of a life being built with intention rather than happened into. In October, I booked a trip. Something I had meant to do for years and deferred because the timing was never right, or the price seemed impractical, or I was waiting for some unspecified future version of myself who was more prepared for adventures. I booked a 12-day trip to Portugal for February. Ruth was coming. We would stay in a small hotel in Lisbon and take a train to Porto, and walk and eat and sleep well, and not explain ourselves to anyone. I had not been to Europe since 1991. Ashley and I rebuilt slowly. There is no other word for it. Slowly. We did not pretend that nothing had happened. We did not perform a reconciliation. We had lunches and phone calls, and one afternoon in October when she came and helped me clear out the garage, which had needed doing for 3 years. We worked side by side and talked about ordinary things, and sometimes about difficult things, and it was not comfortable in the way that easy familiarity is comfortable. It was comfortable in the harder way, the way that comes from knowing the truth of a situation and choosing, in full knowledge of it, to remain. She had started seeing a therapist. She told me this without being asked, in the kitchen, over tea, and I said, "I'm glad." And I was. Diane, from what I understood through various channels, had a harder autumn. Brandon had set limits on her involvement in their life that had not previously existed. Not punitive limits, from what I could gather, but real ones. The kind that result from a husband having to revise his understanding of his own mother's behavior. She called Ashley less. She stopped attending the Sunday dinners she had been a fixture of since the engagement. I did not celebrate this, but I did not mourn it either. There was one piece of news that reached me in November, through Claire, who had been cautiously welcomed back into Ashley's life. Diane had told mutual friends a version of events in which she had tried to protect a difficult family situation and been unfairly maligned. Some of those friends knew Ashley. Some of them, apparently, had asked Ashley directly. Ashley had said, calmly and without drama, that she disagreed with her mother-in-law's account. She had not elaborated. She had not needed to. The truth has a texture that most people can sense, even without documentation. By December, when I put up the Christmas wreath on the door on Birchwood Lane, the same wreath I had used for 15 years, a little worn at the edges now, which I found I liked. I looked at my life and found it good. Not perfect, not without loss or scar, but full in the ways that mattered. Work that used my skills, friendship that required showing up, a relationship with my daughter that was being rebuilt on honest ground, and a trip to Portugal to look forward to. Robert would have approved. He had always valued, above all things, the refusal to be diminished. I had not been diminished. They say a mother's love should be unconditional, and perhaps that is true. But I have learned, the hard way, the real way, that unconditional love does not mean unconditional silence. It does not mean funding the celebration of your own erasure. It does not mean accepting the role others assign you simply because accepting is easier than the alternative. I chose the alternative, and I would choose it again. If someone used your love as a resource and your generosity as a weapon, what would you do? Would you absorb it quietly, or would you pick up the phone? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you stayed. Thank you for listening.